Hi. So I'm going to talk with you a little bit about the contract that exists between employers and employees. What we first want to keep in mind is the whole idea of trust, right? So we talked a lot about trust and how important it is for there to not only be trust between fellow employees, but also trust between upper level management and employees as well, right? So one of the key definitions or terms that's discussed in chapter 7 is the idea of the psychological contract, right? So the psychological contract refers to the beliefs, perceptions, expectations, and obligations that make up the agreement between individuals and the organizations that employ them. Again, so it's the beliefs, the expectations, perceptions, and obligations that make up the relationship between an individual and the organization that employs them, right? So we're going to talk a lot in the future about how the psychological contract is broken. But one of the key ways that the psychological contract goes under or is compromised would be through downsizing, right? And so the author talks about a number of different examples of how downsizing can occur. I'm sure some of you may have family members, parents, cousins, aunts, etc., uncles who have been impacted by downsizing. So what we first of all want to consider is the fact that there are numerous ways that downsizing can occur. If we look at Tesla, we know Tesla just laid off 1,000 workers recently in the earlier part of this year, middle level management, but they were let go, right? So we know that downsizing can happen or happen via layoffs. Downsizing can happen via early retirement packages. We know, as the case with Tesla, that was a restructuring of the organization. So we know in many instances, companies will either redesign their manufacturing process or they'll redesign the hierarchy within the organization. And all of these various strategies can be used to eliminate positions, right? So we have to ask ourselves, what's the impetus or what are the factors that cause a company to downsize? What do you think? What are some of the factors? What we know is that on a very fundamental level, many companies engage in downsizing to increase their earning potential, right? Or to impact the bottom line. So we know that downsizing initially may provide financial gain to a corporation in the short term and maybe in the long term. But we also know when we talk about downsizing, layoffs, etc., that it also can impact the psychological contract. How does that happen, right? So when we talk about the psychological contract referring to beliefs and expectations and obligations, those who are left after downsizing has occurred may experience increased anxiety and depression, as mentioned by your author, right? So it behooves an organization to carefully consider the atmosphere, to carefully consider the impact that downsizing will have on the morale of those that are left in the organization, right? So what are some of the outcomes associated with downsizing? We talked about the economic gain for the company, but we also want to consider, again, the negative repercussions or the negative impact. So there may be a shift in employee morale. Employees that are left may feel a lack of trust or feel, again, like the psychological contract has been breached. We also know that it may impact a company with respect to their ability to hire in the future. So talented individuals in the respective field may shy away from gaining employment with the company once downsizing has occurred because they may be fearful regarding the lack of stability that exists within those organizations. And if organizations are honest, they'll also recognize the fact that there's a loss of intellectual capital. So while you may save on the bottom line, you miss or you're relinquishing or giving up the time, the talent, the investment that's been made in that individual who is let go or who walks away from the company. Statistics say organizations invest $150,000, $200,000 in employees over the lifetime in terms of training. So when an employee is let go, all of their training goes out the door with them, right? So the loss of intellectual capital, the loss of their talent, the loss of their expertise is something to consider, something a firm should consider. Now, some of your parents, some of you may have heard instances in which companies let go or fire individuals who are being paid too much. So the longer your tenure with an organization, the more likely it is that you're going to make a salary that may be out of line with others in the organization, right? And so those are some of the factors that we have to keep in mind when considering the idea of a psychological contract, and even more importantly, the contract that exists between employees and employers.